Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to be with you today on a webinar that we love doing. Activity planning, helping parents and students understand the why and the how of this such important topic and focus for high school students. Now, in terms of our agenda for today, we're going to talk a good amount about what does engagement in activities look like and why it's so important. Where should engagement and activity planning start? How do colleges consider activities? We know that many of you on this webinar today are considering the University of Texas at Austin. So we want to sort of unpack that a little bit about how UT Austin considers a student's activities. And then finally, how can a parent help nurture a student as they work through activity planning?
So let's talk a little bit about why engagement is so important. We've been working with students for 15 years here at College MatchPoint. And one of the things that we have seen is that students who engage in activities in high school are considerably more likely to thrive in college. And what we know is that the work that we do with students, it's not just about getting in college, but it's also about thriving in college. There is data that backs up kind of our original hunch is backed up by data. Students from a Gallup study tell us that students are 2.5 times more likely to say that they excel in school if they are engaged, which makes sense, if they feel connected, if they feel belonging. Some words we're really hearing right now about students in high school. Getting engaged in activity helps them feel that. They're 4 times more likely to be hopeful about the future than peers who are not engaged. And of course, again, another thing in the post-COVID world, helping students feel hopeful is an issue right now. And so this engagement that really has been something that if College MatchPoint had a theology, I think engagement probably is it. And but right now, especially helping students navigate how to get engaged and find things that work for them definitely is both good for their academics and good for their overall health and well-being. Now, one of the things about activity is that oftentimes, I think as adults, we sometimes want to, and students sometimes, we want to approach activities linearly. So I just need to do this in the first year and this in the second year and this in the third year and everything will be great. But activity is actually around human beings. So it changes and it shifts and that's normal. And it's a wave. It's going to build a little bit slower. The wave may not crest where we thought it was going to crest. So you really do have to kind of expect that this is going to be fluid and shift. And that is part of good activity planning, is to have a plan, but also to understand that things are going to shift as we go along. Now, there's a lot of myths and facts. We could do a whole webinar on myths and facts about student engagement, right? And I would say that we have a point of view, which is that we are very interested in helping students learn how to thrive in high school and college. And we believe that most of those things are also good for the college application process, but it's in that order. So the first thing is that you need to join a bunch of clubs at school. Just go join a bunch of clubs. Kids often say to Bob or I when we're meeting with them, oh, my mom said I need to join a club, or my friend said I need to join a bunch of clubs that'll help me get in college. Now, clubs are great, so I'm not talking clubs down. It's great if you're interested in French and you decide to join the French club, or you think you want to be an engineer, so you join the robotics team. Those are things that you're genuinely interested in, that you're probably going to get involved at some level because you're genuinely interested in them. Those would be good clubs. We see successful college candidates every year, and a fair number of them, I would say, that don't have any school clubs on their resume. So you don't have to have school clubs. And remember that many school clubs are only meeting once a week. I mean, or at the most. So they're not going to really take up a ton of time, and time is when you ultimately get to your application is the currency in engagement. So clubs can be great if you're into them, but you don't have to have them. Passion is another one that we hear a lot about. So, everyone says, follow your passion, follow your dreams. There's nothing wrong with passions, but I would say you want to carry your skills and your aptitudes with you first. Like, what are you good at, and what is it that you want to learn, and then bring your passions along versus just following only your passions. Because what kids we find out, and Bob will talk about in a little bit, is all of our students have many aptitudes and skills, and they usually have things that they actually want to develop. Now, the next one is probably my personal pet peeve, and that is just run for a whole bunch of community service hours. Hey, I got 100 community service hours. That's definitely going to, I got the presidential award. That's definitely going to get me into college. Now, there's 2 points on this. The first one is most of those are like a whole big conglomeration of things. So when you get to trying to show it to a college, it's really hard for the college to tell what you genuinely care about. Now, if you got 100 hours, I have a student right now, if you got 100 hours in a specific cause, that's going to mean a whole lot more, and is likely to have a much bigger impact on the student because they actually committed and got engaged and had some sort of skin in the game with that. So just going for hours is really not necessary. It also sometimes means that kids are running around doing so much, one-off community service. It takes a lot of their time where they could be getting deeply involved in something. And our last myth is that extracurriculars are extracurriculars and academics are over here, and the two shall never meet. And as you'll hear as we go along today, there's a lot of opportunity for those two things to overlap. And often on a resume, those two things will overlap. So there might be some academics woven in with some extracurricular. So that actually can be a real advantage if you can learn how to make those things overlap. Now, as we kind of, enter this conversation, and we're going to really take apart, the different types of ways to go at this, how to plan. One of the things that I think both parents and students sometimes helps is if it's a buzzword, growth mindset, but what does that really mean? It means that I'm open to trying new things. I'm open to doing something different. I'm okay if I fail. Students who failed in different projects, I'm thinking of a young man, and it wasn't a failure, but he got what he thought was a stellar internship in engineering. It just so happened he hated engineering. So I guess one could call that a failure. However, what he learned from that, he's now a very successful businessman out in the world. He learned, wait, I'm more interested in the business side. So even though on the one side, he got an engineering internship and it was a failure, if you will, it actually was, he learned a lot because it was challenging because he had to stay there all summer and this thing he didn't like and he had to grow from it. So as we approach this, the mindset with which a student and the whole family come at this work is going to impact probably how the student approaches engagement.
Now, it can be challenging for a student, particularly younger students, to figure out, how do I plan for activities? And in our 15 years of work with students and parents, we've developed a model, what we call the I-4 model, that helps students understand sort of how their engagement might build, where it might take them, and how to use this almost as a compass as they think through, hey, I don't necessarily want to be involved in this anymore, but I think I might want to build on this and go this way. And again, as Lisa said, this isn't always a straight line. Students are young adults. They change their mind, they explore, they experiment. At a simple level, the I-4 components are interest. What energizes a student? And again, this can be all over the map. We always urge students, don't think of interest only as things that colleges will like. Think about interest in terms of what energizes you, involvement. What are the things that initially you want to become engaged in? And that engagement doesn't have to be I'm president of the club or I start a nonprofit. It can simply be how do you step into that area of interest. Now, we do see more and more students, once they become involved, step it up, take initiative, help either improve something in the world from a community standpoint or step up their involvement as it relates to an area they're interested in or even a major they may consider. And then more and more, particularly after the peak of the pandemic, we've seen many students focusing on how they can make a difference in the communities that they're a part of. Now, we oftentimes have families ask us, should my student be doing the exact same thing in 8th and 9th grade as they do when they become juniors and seniors? And developmentally, 8th, 9th, 10th graders are much more ready to explore, to figure out who they are, to figure out where do I want to try some areas of involvement out that might interest me. And again, these students are disproportionately likely to change their mind, to try something and then find out, nope, it's not that. Now I'm going to try this. To think of that growth mindset in terms of, I haven't found my area of involvement yet, as opposed to, I've got to nail it on the first thing I'm involved in. In 11th grade, we do see students focus a little bit more on opportunities for initiative and impact. They've been deeply involved in an activity. They've tried things on. They may or may not have chosen a path that they want to move into and up on. Now, what's at the core of this activity planning? As we've said multiple times already, we don't think the core is what looks good to a college. That's not a sustainable motivation for a teenager. A sustainable motivation for a teenager is, what are my talents? What are my aptitudes? Now, we don't expect that 8th, 9th, 10th, even 11th graders will immediately come to this planning process with that identified. We're big fans of helping a student better understand what her aptitudes are. Second, what kind of skills motivate them right now that they enjoy using, and where do they want to develop or learn more about those skills? And then finally, what excites me? What motivates me to use these aptitudes and skills? Now, as we mentioned, we think that it's really difficult for a student on their own, or even in engagement with an adult, to come to a deeper sense of their aptitudes, their skills, or their motivators. So we found a set of tools. There are lots of tools out there, but one of the tools that we use fairly consistently with students is an online assessment called U-Science. It's a 90-minute test. It's not going to get everything perfect, but it helps students understand, what are my talents? How do I problem solve? What's the first way I approach trying to engage in a problem? And then what motivates me? Do I like helping people? Am I a creative person that likes original work? Am I competitive? And these pieces of reflection and understanding can oftentimes be the springboard to help a student start their activity planning process. Now, as teenagers, it's easy to talk at a very high level about a plan. We encourage all students and families to initially, at least, translate that understanding to an activity plan. This is a tool we use with many students, a simple step-by-step planner, but you'll notice it also encourages a student to reflect, because reflection is so critical in this, to reflect on how energized were they in this activity, how difficult did they find it, and then finally, how many resources did they have to draw on? Did they ask for help? Did they have to draw on adults or other students in order to take on this activity. And we find that students who become more and more comfortable with this level of reflection are able to deepen their involvement and take initiative and show impact. Now, oftentimes we find parents enter into this conversation and start by saying, help. My student's much more interested in TikTok or a brand new video game than they are in becoming more engaged in the classroom or outside of the classroom. And we understand that. We encourage all families to start with where the student is right now. All students have interest. All students have skills. Oftentimes when we talk with students who are stuck, the first thing they say is, well, I know that this doesn't count, but I love doing this. Start with where the student is. Second, help them brainstorm outlets for their exploration, outlets for trying things on. It might be an interview with an adult who's in an area that interests them. It might be an activity with their friends, low risk, an opportunity to simply have a student explore. And as a parent, take advantage of the network of friends that you have to help connect them with resources, be they be resources that you know in your friend group or in your professional group. Now, once a student tries something new, celebrate their willingness. Don't put expectations in a fixed mindset way on an outcome. And then finally, and this is something we cannot stress enough, if a student is stuck, start by trying activities as a family. Start by trying things where they feel safe, where they feel like they're doing this in a place that they're comfortable and familiar with. Now, oftentimes parents and students ask us this idea of engagement in activities, could you be a little more specific? This is a list of common types of activities that we've seen in our work with students. It's in no way comprehensive. But it does begin to give you a sense of what's the menu of options that once a student understands her aptitude, skills, and motivations, she might try to get more involved in. Many of these happen during the school year. A number of them happen during the summer, which is a very active opportunity for students to become more engaged. I want to point out a couple of these examples because we oftentimes have families ask about them. The first one is families typically say, should my student go away to a college for a pre-college program? We have students who are super interested in a topic that they have no opportunity to explore. I right now have 5 different young men who are really interested in sports analytics. They spend all their time analyzing statistics from their favorite baseball or basketball or football team, and that's great, but they don't really have an opportunity to engage with friends or with adults who really have expertise in that. And so going to a college program at a college campus can be a great opportunity for that. It can also be a great opportunity for a student who's struggling developmentally with the idea of leaving home and going to college, trying it on in a low-risk way for a week. Lisa, a number of our attendees today have questions around independent research, which is increasingly a popular topic. Could you talk a little bit about independent research and the options for that?
Sure. I think the one of the questions was, does it look bad if you actually pay for an independent research program? And I heard an admissions rep, we go to a lot of college conferences in our work and tour a lot of colleges. And so we were at a conference last year and someone asked this question. I love the Johns Hopkins rep said, they look favorably on the student is interested in whatever topic. So they go to this program to learn more about it. So what's sometimes called the pay to play isn't a negative in and of itself, right? But what she said was so important. And I think we have seen this in our own work, It's what you do with that afterwards. So if you were to do an independent research project on something, can you tie it to your schoolwork? Can you tie it to a local program so that it's not just you went and you did the program prescribed, right? And I would say that we have seen students get really great experiences out of those. But if you really want to show that you have initiative, then you need to take it and do a little bit more with it. And I think that's where we've seen students really hit a sweet spot, is when they maybe do one of the, paid research programs, or there are, like UT has some research programs. They're hard to get, which is why there have been so many, independent ones that have come on the market. But we do find that, we're based in Austin, that students can find them, but I wouldn't say that if you end up needing to use one of these programs for many reasons, that is a negative. Because the same is true even with research that you did on your own. Then what else did you do with it? And we'll talk a little bit about the sort of chaining of activities as we go along.
One other type of activities that is very common for students, either in between sophomore and junior year, or more frequently between junior and senior year, is an internship. Now, I know that can seem daunting to students. It could be all summer, it could be a couple of weeks. Students always ask us, how would I, as a high school student, find an internship? And the honest answer is almost always this comes from a family's network of friends or colleagues. That opportunity to contact that friend and say, hey, my daughter is finally at the place where she's considering college majors. Could she come and work with you for a couple of weeks to better understand what this major and profession involves? And given that, internships are oftentimes opportunities, like many of these, that students and parents will need to start planning early on and not leave until the last minute. Now, it's easy to simply list a menu of activities. We have, in our work with students, found that there are sort of descriptors of the kinds of students who got involved, and these are oftentimes surprising to students or families to say, that actually is really something that motivated me, but does it quote unquote count? I know you have a couple of ones on here, Lisa, that are your favorites. Could you maybe use them as examples of where you've seen students become more engaged?
Absolutely. And I think these also show how when the students started one part of engagement, they didn't maybe know where else they would go with it, right? So for example, my Instagram fashionista, she was a photographer and she loved to do pictures, and she mainly took pictures of her friends, or, if they were out and about, or if she was on a trip. And then she was like, following, and today this would probably be on TikTok. She's out of college now, but so she began to think, oh, I could take pictures of outfits. So first she would just take outfits that her friends were wearing that she liked, but then she started like going to thrift stores and like creating great outfits and putting them on Instagram, and got quite a lot of followers, and actually ended up opening, a little business with selling these outfits. So what started out as a young lady who just liked taking pictures, she started a business, she honed it into a certain topic. And if you had asked her that in the 9th grade, she would never have thought she was going to do that. She did, interestingly enough, she went on a summer photography program, either after 9th or 10th grade, where she honed the photography interest, and then the rest grew out of it. And then my other kind of favorite one is a young man who really was not a joiner at all. So really had very little engagement. However, he spent an enormous amount of time reading history, loved American history. And so he knew everything. And so then he asked his mom to take him to some of the sites in Texas that were interesting to him. And just on a lark, they videoed him talking about these spots. So he would give his kind of brain dump on what he knew about these sites. And then he made YouTube history videos, which actually became quite popular. Again, this wasn't all like, oh, we're going to go on this trip and it just all kind of evolved. And I think that's one of the things that and he was a good example of, he wasn't going to do that with friends. And so, I mean, his parents did take him to those sites, and they were, encouraging him to, but respecting where his interests lie and how he was probably going to engage with that. So those are two kind of fun examples of two students who were very successful in college and who kind of leaned their way into engagement, if you will.
We find that these case studies can be super helpful, so we want to give you a couple of other examples of where activity planning started for students. The first one is Jenny. Jenny loved ice cream. I can empathize with that. I love ice cream as well. She acted on that love of ice cream and got a job at the ice cream store that she spent hours going to, and was really considered as the expert ice cream scooper, also the dishwasher. And she started this in 10th grade. She started where she was at in terms of what she loved and what she was interested in, and she got a great job. Next one is a student, L. L, like many young people, was super involved in Minecraft, just loved doing it, and sort of started helping their friends creating mods to Minecraft. Over the winter break in 9th grade, they decided to say, hey, I've done all that coding in Minecraft. I want to take an online class to learn more about a specific programming language because I'm interested in it, not because they were taking a class or because a parent or a counselor told them to, but because they were just super interested. The third example is Smita, a student who's always loved science. Her parents recognized that and took her to science museums wherever she went. In the fall of 9th grade, she said, hey, I want to become a volunteer at a local hospital, welcoming patients. And then the final example is a student named Javi, who learned a love of reading from his grandmother, who he visited every summer. Between 9th and 10th grade, Javi decided to act on that love by taking part in a summer writing workshop focused on short stories because they wanted to translate their love of reading to an opportunity to write. And Javi is a great example to underscore this is not just about students who are interested in STEM or business becoming more engaged. The humanities and social sciences have a broad opportunity, a number of opportunities for students to become more engaged. Now, one of the things that we provide to students and families is an annual listing of opportunities for engagement in the spring and summer, a database, if you will, for students and parents to be able to research and find engagement opportunities that they may want to research and include in their activity plan.
So you may wonder, like, how does all of this fit into college? How do colleges evaluate activities? So let's talk a little bit about that. One of the ways that we would say is that some of this has changed post-COVID. And so there's always your academic rigor is what colleges are overall evaluating you, not just on your activities. Your grades and your transcripts are always at the center of that, right? But then on the edges, there's three kind of buckets that we see. These are certainly not the only buckets, but when we get more up the food chain where Bob was talking about, initiative and impact, you're going to see it hopefully in one of these three buckets. One is intellectual curiosity. What is this student interested in that they want to take the initiative to learn more about, right? So, and that could be broad. That could be Bob's sports analytics people. That could be the girl who wanted to study pre-med. That could be anything in between. But what is it that I'm so curious about that I want to learn more about it that I haven't learned in school? So that would be one thing that I think colleges look at is where did the student do that? The second one, which we'll talk more about when we talk about UT, is what we call fit to major. What has the student done that shows that they actually are interested in the major that they're declaring? Now, if a student is applying to, say, a small liberal arts college where it's very common to have multiple interests, then what are those multiple interests that a student has in their fit to major? The third one kind of goes back to my conversation about the community service hours. Colleges are really moving away from here, show us a whole bunch of hours, to what is it that you want, what's the way you want to impact the world? How will your school be different because you were there? Your neighborhood, your community, your city, the world. What is some small thing that you want to impact? And in a perfect world, especially for a student who's going for more competitive colleges, that you did that over an arc of time. So you didn't just decide at the end of junior year, oh no, I haven't done community service, so I'm gonna go over to the food bank a little bit. The food bank's awesome, and that could be great, but it's tying it to work that's inspired by something that you deeply care about and want to change or move. And so that is our experience is that this is a little harder for kids to engage with. And so we help them do that. And it does take a little bit of a longer arc to get there, but it is something that can really help a student stand out to colleges. Now then, we know that colleges are looking for a lot of skills and they're looking for many different kinds of engagement. I'm going to hit on a few things in this list that I see especially important right now. I would say character is one that post-COVID colleges are really looking at. So things like common good activities are going to check that box very well. So are things that involve collaboration and working with others, knowing that this student can work well with others, because at the end of the day, the colleges want to know that this is going to be a good member of our community here at our campus, and that this person is going to be able to work with others, because that's important to the to a college culture continuing is the kind of people that they bring there. I would say creativity and problem solving are also really important skills to colleges, as are resilience and self-advocacy. We are seeing more and more students reporting staying in their rooms, not getting involved, and colleges are shifting their world, but they're wanting to see examples that students are doing that in high school, because what students did in high school is the biggest predictor of how they're going to go in college. So these are some of the things they're looking for. Of course, as we said, ultimately by that junior year, we're hoping that the student will have gotten to a point where they have made taken initiative and made an impact in their communities. And as Bob said earlier, for students who this is really scary for, you definitely can do this as a family. We had a wonderful family a few years back that was really into animal rights, and they did a lot as a family, but yet each student in the family took a different job based on their skills. So overall, looking for ultimately, how will you make an impact? And that could be a big impact, or what isn't maybe a big impact, but you are able to communicate it. That's important, that you can actually communicate what impact you made.
Now, there are a couple of examples that we shared earlier that we want to build on and explain how a college might ultimately look at these activities in this engagement. Jenny, the ice cream lover, not only was she the expert scooper, but the ice cream shop looked at her and said, "You're such an advocate for this. We want to promote you to a citywide position where you're merchandising ice cream." And that student, Jenny, it sparked her interest in sales. She would have never considered herself a salesperson when she first got that job. but it ultimately allowed her to take on more initiative and communicate to herself and to the schools that she applied to. I'm really interested in schools that have great marketing or sales programs. The second example is Elle, who took the class to teach themselves Swift. Based on that, they enjoyed that online course so much that they learned 3 other programming languages on that platform. Before their junior year, they did attend one of the pay-to-play online research academies that Lisa mentioned. But as Lisa said, the importance of that was to start their initiative. It wasn't to simply to be involved. It was to say, I now have these skills and this experience. And they took that experience in research and was part of a team that looked at the impact of TikTok on teen mental health. Now, Smita, who was interested in science as a young person and who volunteered at the local hospital, attended a summer program prior to her junior year where she connected with other students who shared her interest in medicine. And she built on that to then pursue an internship. Her parents were the initial point of connection in cancer research at a local teaching hospital in the summer between her junior and senior year. Now, Lisa, could you talk a little bit about how highly selective colleges, the most competitive schools, look at activities either in terms of admissions and or in terms of specific majors at their school?
Absolutely. Because I think one of the important things as you're thinking about the level of engagement for your student is to think about maybe where they're thinking of applying, right? And if the answer is highly selective colleges and or highly selective majors, then I think that it shifts ever so slightly. I would say, first of all, you want to think about, is the student engaged at a regional level, a state level, a national level? Do students see problems that they're trying to solve? One of the things I often ask my highly selective students is, so how will things be different because you are there? That could be your school, that could be your community, that could be some, your temple, whatever, but where are you really making an impact, a true impact that is measurable? And if you're going for highly selective, this has to start younger. It's very, very hard. You can catch up, but you really, in an ideal world, you want to start this younger so that you have time to build. And this is especially true for our STEM students. So we see this in computer science, engineering, data science, that you really need extensive multi-year engagements with portfolios, with GitHub, with the, something that shows the work that you've done. And then I think independent research is becoming another way to stand out. I don't believe it's the only way. And I do want to say that. I think there are students independent research is a great option for, and I think there's other students that are going at their at showing their skills and talents to colleges over an arc that might not include research. But we do know, if you just think about this, student is reviewed by an admissions committee. On the first read, they're looking at grades, test scores, resume, all that. But in the second read, most of that everyone has the same grades and test scores or similar, right? And so what you've done really rises to the top. And that's where you can't hide. You've got to have a very solid resume that tells your story, not a padded resume, but as a resume that is only you, that makes sense and is authentically you. Now, UT, of course, has a whole other way of reviewing activities that we wanted to kind of take that apart, because we know that so many of you are genuinely interested in the University of Texas at Austin. And so let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. And we made a little graphic to kind of help explain this. So one of the things that we're doing here is we're not wanting to get 9th and 10th graders worried about how to apply to UT. What we want to do is show you where it'll ultimately end up so that as you're planning, you have some idea. Your essays are going to show the things that are going to be places where you reflect on what you've done. And one of the really critical things in the college application process is not just doing these things, but also being able to reflect on what you learned from it. The expanded resume is one of the parts of the UT admissions process that is really unique. I can't think of another place that has it. I'm sure there is, but it is and parents, just for a minute, cancel what you think about resumes because this breaks all the rules. This is long, like it's probably 3 to 4 pages. For the student who's really been doing a lot, it could be 5 or 6. So this is a long resume, and its highlight is what the student's fit to major, and then it is showing leadership and all the rest of the things that the student's done, and in a pretty significant detail. Both the essay and the resume need to 100% fit with the major the student is applying for. When you think of an application to UT, the first piece that should come to your mind is it's a case for a major. I'm applying to a major. How do I show that I fit that major? This is true at some other big state colleges, but I think UT is on the extreme end on this, and they're really upfront and honest about it. UT is not a good school to go to if you really don't know what you want to major in. Then your letters of recommendation would fit into that puzzle. Your transcript, hopefully your coursework would line up if you, depending on what you want to study. For example, if you want to be an engineer or a business major, yes, you do need calculus, so plan for that. So each one of these pieces, but what you are applying to be a Longhorn. But when you're thinking about being a Longhorn, that's when you need to, 1, focus on your grades for sure. 2, make sure that you're getting 3 to 4 fit to major activities. That's really important. And then make sure you're showing some leadership, because they are also really looking at leadership. Now then, like I said, we're not wanting to get you guys worried about essays, and these could easily change, although 1 and 2 have been on there the whole 15 years that I've been doing this. So I'm guessing they're likely to stay. Why are you interested in your first choice major? This question is looking for you to be able to back that up with activity other than just your coursework, ideally. You certainly can weave coursework in, but you really want to have some engagement that you have done around your major. The second one is leadership. Again, UT likes leadership. They want to know that you can work well with other people, that you engage, right? Now, this does not have to be you're the president of the student council. It could be in your family, at your church, in your community, at your job, lots of different places. So it doesn't have to be a super formal leadership, but you've got to be able to talk about how you're a leader. Both of these questions, just so you know, are right now asked at many, many, many colleges. So just for you to understand that it's not just UT. And then the last one is, how are you going to take what you learned at UT and change the world after you graduate? So again, you hear that impact in there. If you've been doing impact and you've been doing common good work, you're going to easily be able to answer that question. Bob, do you have anything to add to that?
No, except to say that these essays, as Lisa said, fit as a puzzle piece to that expanded resume that is so unique to UT. Lisa, could you talk a little bit more about how that expanded resume connects to a student's activities?
Absolutely. So really, this is where you are showing your activities. So you're showing 3 to 4 pages of your activities. The currency, as I said earlier, in college admissions is hours. And the reason I stress that is a whole bunch of padded things that you didn't spend much time on are probably not going to ultimately be worthy of your resume. So you want some things that you go deep in, and you want to be able to explain what your role was in that. And this is not a super formal resume. I love this opportunity. And I think one of the things that is really cool about UT is that they are really reading all this stuff. There are schools that are predominantly numbers games. UT really does take all of this into account when they're looking for students who are going to fit the school. So this is an opportunity. If you are in the 9th, the 10th, or even the 11th grade, this is a wonderful opportunity to help your application shine. Now then, there are some majors that are even more competitive, and this changes up, although I would say has stayed somewhat consistent over time. And I would say UT pretty much follows what we're seeing nationally, so there's not a huge difference there. I think in the last year, we've seen business become nationally very competitive. Macombs has been competitive for quite a while. The engineering school, computer science, natural sciences, architecture, there may be a couple small programs like nursing. But when the programs are more competitive, let's talk about UT for a second. Many of those slots are going to get filled by the top 6% or whatever the percentage is when you are applying. And so shining to get one of the spots that's left means you really have to have great grades. So this is not a webinar on grades, but you do have to have that. But you've also got to have great activities that are going to shine there to be competitive.
Lisa, how does fit to major factor into students who are auto-admit students to UT who are in the top 6% of their high school class?
Oh, great question. So even if you're in the top 6%, the good news is you are admitted to be a Longhorn, so you can be a Longhorn. It does not, however, guarantee you your major. So again, when we go back to activity, even if you are an auto admit, you still want to be focusing on activities so that you are able to shine in the applicant pool for that major, so that you don't just get in, but you get the major that you actually want.
One of the questions that parents often ask us is, what role should I play in my students' activity planning? We want to go back to the idea that Dr. Carol Dweck framed, and that idea of a growth mindset. The first observation we have for parents is the conversation about activity planning should not start with college admissions. It should not start with what looks good to a college application. This is not Google Maps. This is not taking the resume of a friend who got into Stanford or Harvard or Rice or UT and simply saying we need to use those as directions on how to get into college, but instead to really embrace this idea that allows the student to value what they're doing regardless of the outcome, to stretch themselves, to stick to it, to feel like I haven't found it yet, but I might be able to look at how to pivot or come back and look at those skills and motivators as a map for where they might want to try more engagement. Lisa, there's a couple of specific ways that you found for parents to help nurture engagement. Could you talk a little bit about the advice you would give to parents during their students' activity planning?
You know, I think that one of the things that happens almost as a student enters high school in our culture is that parents become somewhat fearful and anxious about the college process, which is understandable. I think that sometimes that anxiety can keep one from listening to your student, because you're so worried that, oh no, they're not going to get what they need. Start with where your student's at, and most of the time the student will grow to expand what they're doing. But this is ultimately a student's launch to college is a student's launch into young adulthood, right? And that is a singular, it's not a we. But listening to your student to help them navigate is a very important piece of the process. And I think we see with many of our students that their parents have been wonderful sounding boards. Now, I also know I've worked with teenagers my entire life, and I've had two of my own. Some of them do not want to hear what you have to say. And so this is not going to be the same for every family, or even if you're, my experience, even having raised 2 kids with each child is very different. So you're going to know what the right thing is with your student there. I think one of the places we really see our families, because we do focus on engagement so much, is that help connect your student to the resources for engagement is really important, and be willing to reciprocate to your friends, your neighbors, and whoever, so that people are willing to help. I think that has become very common, but that's a place where students need help. They don't have experience in that. If your student is really hesitant, especially in those young years, try to be an active family that's getting out there and doing things as a family to get your student more comfortable with stepping out. And then finally, I think this is one of the spots we see students having the hardest time with, and that is when they come to the point of writing college essays, the ability to reflect does not come naturally to students. And so encourage reflection in just your everyday dinner conversations or car drives. Like, hey, what was that like for you if they went to some special, if they did a special event or something? What part of it did you enjoy? Versus, are you going to keep doing that? How many hours did you get? Did you make sure that you encourage, which is hard. And I'm a mom and I can totally ask those other questions. So I get it. But I think that where you can be helpful to your student is if you can catch yourself and try to encourage that reflection, because students who can reflect really do have an advantage when they do get to that spot of applying to college.
Thanks so much for taking time from your busy schedule to join us for this conversation about activity planning. We hope the rest of the day goes great for you and your students. And thanks so much.